My name is Barbara Hutchinson, and today, in another of our Sure Smile series of podcasts, I talk with Tiff Qureshi. Tiff is a past president of the British Academy of Cosmetic Dentistry, founder and clinical director of the IAS Academy, and has pioneered the concept of progressive smile design. Welcome, Tiff. And can I start by asking you, do you believe it's patient demand or technological advancement that have been the main driver for the increase in aligner options that we now see available?
I think actually technology has definitely helped because it's enabling us to kind of show people where they were and where they are now. Now, of course, I've been doing that for some years with just simple photography, and that's not the easiest thing for everyone to do. I mean, a lot of dentists don't repeatedly take photographs of patients' teeth, but by doing that, I was able to see things change. Now, of course, that's now switched to scanning. And if we are scanning patients' teeth, not just to do aligners for them, but to actually just see where they are right now and be able to discuss with the patients what they can see and rotate the images and start to look at wear facets and dentine exposure, all this sort of stuff, or tooth position, it enables people to see something kind of completely differently rather than looking down the throat and telling them, you need this, you need this, you need that. They don't really get that. I realized that some time ago just with basic photography, but now moving it into scanning, it's a completely different ballgame. And then, of course, the ability with scanners to take scans and actually then superimpose them on top of each other and start to actually diagnose movement change, tooth surface loss, gum position. That's just a game changer. And I would say that it's with modern day, technology, with what's available. If I was a patient sat in the chair, that's what I'd be expecting my dentist to do. I wouldn't want them to say to me 10 years later, oh, looks like your teeth have all been wearing down, and maybe 10 years ago we should have taken a picture or taken a scan of it. Do you see what I mean? So I think that it's definitely technology led, no doubt, or it's facilitated by technology. But I think that actually, fundamentally, it's something that we should be trained as dentists to be doing, not just now because the technology is here, but quite frankly, 15, 20 years ago when we were all picking up cameras then. The idea of photography or even imagery being taught to dental students is something which is becoming harder because they are being made to sign forms out to get picked. The camera, you should have a camera bolted to your hands basically when you're learning to do dentistry. If you don't do that, you're not really going to be learning it fully. So I think that there's a bit of a mixture of answers on that it's something we should be doing anyway. But actually, technology now, particularly with scanning and also scanning software, comparative software like AuraCheck, etc., that gives us the ability. There's no excuse not to be looking at these things. And particularly with the kind of medical legal environment we live in, you need to be on it basically.
So when you have a patient in the chair, do you show them where they're going to get to? Do you kind of show them what the end result might look like? Is that help?
Well, I think the first thing to do is to actually show them what's going on with their teeth. It's not so much about, yes, I want their patient's teeth to look better, and yes, I want them to have, if they need it, ortho and bonding, etc. That's great. I'm happy about that. The key thing is for them to actually understand that there have been changes. That's the most important thing, and to actually understand what those changes mean for them. So the trick is to actually, I'm lucky enough to have been taking pictures of patients' teeth for many years. So as a result, I can show them a person before and then a person 5 years later with no treatment. I can show that same patient their own teeth 5 years ago. And when you do that, it is literally eye-opening. One of the problems is that we rely in dentistry on this thing called the dental chart. And a dental chart, I'm going to try and be polite, is probably one of the most useless pieces of information you could ever have. It's utterly useless. It's like it's like a kindergarten toy that someone's just, or a drawing tool that someone's just filled in. If you look at a dental chart, and then if you are meant to look at that dental chart and then somehow 5 years assess later whether the patient's OVD has reduced, whether they've got a bit more dentine exposure, whether their envelope function's constricted, whether there's a little bit more enamel crazing, you're dreaming. It's never going to happen. And x-rays are almost equally as useless to a certain degree. Of course, we need x-rays. But the fact of the matter is that photography, scanning, and imagery is there to tell us these things. So actually, if we can get people to see those dynamic changes and understand what they mean, kind of in the long term, then it's much, much easier for a patient to then say, okay, I can see this is changing, then what we can do. And then, of course, using the software and the before and after software and all those bits and pieces, digital smile design, all that's nice, and it really does help. But I'm a little bit different to the way that, I don't like selling work to patients. I would never take a new patient and just say to them, this is what you could look like. I've done that before, did that 20 years ago. And I can tell you something, it's all right, it works, but I find it much, much better for a patient who hasn't, they've known me for the last 6 months, 18 months, 3 years, whatever it may be. And it's much, much better for me to explain to the patients what's happening to their teeth, telling them the actual truth of what's going on, and for the patient to then come back in 6 months or a year, who knows, 5 years, and they'll say to me, Tiff, you were saying that lower tooth was drifting forward and it's knocking my upper one and it's likely to be wearing. I think it is. I can feel it hitting and it's looking a bit darker. Can we now do the ortho? And so 80% of the patients, in my surgery who are having ortho and bonding and all that kind of stuff are those patients. They're not new patients. And I think that's a much, much safer way of treating patients rather than giving them the big sell. Now, when someone wants something, it's great to then pick up a scanner and, got a prime scan now and it's amazing. And I could show them, I could say, look, now you want it, I can show you a little simulation software. And it's like, yeah, bang, that's what I want to do. But I think I think our industry is too focused on that front selling of trying to get new people through the door. Just, this is what you could look like, this is what you could look like. And I can tell you something, having done that 20, 25 years ago, it's okay for some people, but it's actually not the best way of practicing. That's, I'll try and be polite of saying it. It's not the right way to practice, in my opinion.
So clear aligners is a very crowded marketplace now, but in relation to SureSmile specifically, what individual aspects of the system best meet the needs of the patients and the clinicians?
Well, I think one of the big things that sets it aside is actually that it's scan only. And I know funny enough, when I first sort of heard about it and I heard it was scan only, I initially thought, oh, that's a mistake. That means we're not going to be, it's going to be a lot less dentists who'll use it, blah, 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 blah. But actually, the more I've started to fully understand, years down the line, I understand clear aligners, and more I've learned, the more I've realized that actually impression taking causes some of the biggest issues with clear aligners that actually then makes them less predictable. And the reality is, even if you get a really good impression, the likelihood is you've actually caused a bit of mucocompression on the gum line, which then makes it harder or more awkward for the option of having a higher finish line when you may clinically need that. So, there were a lot of systems out there that we know that just use scallops. And actually the reality is they are partly using those because they're trying to get around poor impressions or the fact that they're having to use impressions. So I think scanning is, in my opinion, scan only is a genius move for predictability. And I think, looking back at my case, it's absolutely clear that because it's scan only, I have it, SureSmile easily has been, the most predictable system that I've used. I think also I like the fact that the movement planning is conservative. So sometimes, with aligners, it's almost like there's a race to get there. I don't know why. There's sort of like, but actually, I know that the cases are going to get there. And actually, purely from value for money point of view, it's exactly the same. Yes, you might have a few more aligners, but you're going to get there and the case is going to work. So I really like that. And I also would say that the aligners, clearly, I'm not too sure. I don't know all the technology with the printers that you're using, but it looks like the printers that you're using are ultra high definition, and therefore with the material as it's pulled over the models, it comes out ultra clear with minimal amount of striation lines. So that then keeps the aligners looking much more clear from the beginning and then looking much nicer throughout the treatment as well. I can't think of the last patient who's had discomfort or anything like that. It's all working really nicely and smoothly.
And what about the control that you've got over the treatment planning with SureSmile? How does that work? And that presumably gives you full control of the case.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the other thing is, as you say, is the digital software. So basically, yes, you can. Firstly, I think in the case submission, what's good is that you are prompted to be asked for certain things that are clinically important. That if you just took a scan and then just said, "Make me some aligners," the danger is that you could end up with teeth in the wrong position for that patient, not related to their face and the soft tissues, etc. But because the current way of actually submitting a case, and I know the future way will be the same, but in the sense that you have to put certain things in that are asking you for effectively like reference points, and is one arch correct, and where do you want your IPR, etc. You're being prompted to actually think about the case. So I think that's really, really important. That you're thinking about why am I being asked this, and what should the answer be, which I think is really good. It's all simple stuff, and if you've done an assessment, it should be straightforward. Then the digital software, when it comes back, what I've seen is that there's some very unique features which I've not seen in, and I put my hand up here, and I've used lots of different systems, okay, and I still use various systems, okay, but it's absolutely clear with SureSmile that there's a couple of things in there that I have not seen anywhere else, and I might be wrong. But one of the first things that's really stand out is actually the fact that you've got the facial positioning of the smile. So you'll be asked for a picture of the face, and then what the software will do is position a 2D image of the 3D image that you can still kind of play the before and after in the face, so you can actually see where the teeth line up relative to the position of the eyes and the nose. So it's sort of facially driven treatment planning, and that it seems quite unique to me, and I use that in literally every case, and I always show my patients that before and after image of their face and the teeth in that position. So that's actually really, really good. The second thing I think that's is really good. I mean, the grid features are quite common, but I think the grid feature is done very well. And what the grid feature is basically a way of working out distances and what I call controlling my landmark points, actually knowing where I've asked for teeth to be moved to, or to remain, or not to be moved at all, etc. And another really unique feature, which I'm not sure many people will kind of appreciate how good this is, but there is something called a clipping frame feature. And basically what that means is you could take your 3D model, you can spin your model, but what it will do is it will take a cross section through the model. Now, what that means is, if you are interested in looking to understand how the anterior envelope of function is going to work, okay, and that's a kind of occlusal dental term, which is very, very important for the way teeth kind of move, you've got it right there in front of you. And I was, the first sort of time I was flicking through all the features of SureSmile, and I found that I literally nearly fell off my chair. I was like, wow, I never thought anyone would do it. Because yes, you can, with a lot of the system, you can kind of spin the model and look it from behind, but you can never actually see a cross section. And so what you can see is maybe your before position, where the envelope is clearly going to be constricted, where you've got maybe a class 2 div 2 situation where the upper is back, and you can see where the teeth are touching in the wrong position, to the position after, and also how it's going to get there as well. So, and that's just one of, I think, quite a few individual very, very unique features that are in the SureSmile software. And what's clear is that it struck me when I looked at it, because I do understand how SureSmile Align has been developed. It's sort of been developed from the top end of very high tech specialism, and it's then been, and so a lot of those features that some very high end specialists would use SureSmile for have then been used and integrated into a GDP platform. So, and obviously they're taking out some of the bits that you don't need, or that we don't need the GDPs, but it's kept some things up that if you are interested in those really important fine details that I think are critical for any GDP doing any ortho, it's right there. So that's one of the reasons I think it's also really good.
And you mentioned that SureSmile is a purely digital workflow, and the accuracy versus the inaccuracy, I suppose, of analog impressions. Is there anything else other than the inherent inaccuracy of an analog impression that makes SureSmile's digital approach superior?
There are actually some studies, I can't quote them, but there are some studies that show that if you have a higher finish line on clear aligners, you increase the retention. And obviously, if you are only using impressions, then, as I say, the danger of having a high finish line is that you can cause mucus compression that can make the liners very uncomfortable and sort of dig in. Now, there's various reasons why you might want a high finish line or low finish line, and it might be to do with clinical crown height. It might be to do with short teeth undercuts, etc. But generally, as a rule, in ortho, if you particularly got rotations in the case, it would be nice to be able to start with a lower finish line or potentially even a scallop to begin with, and then to actually finish the case, or as you go through the case, and to increase that trim line height. And I know it's actually quite possible to do that with SureSmile. It's not, you have to kind of, you have to, when you input your case, you have to ask for it, but it can be done. Or, as I say, if you've got a patient with a low clinical crown height and, not many rotations, you can just ask for a high finish line. And so that's one of the really important things that scanning gives. If you accepted, if SureSmile accepted impressions and then you were asking for variable trim lines, you would undoubtedly end up with lots of issues and patients having uncomfortable aligners. So I think that's really one of the most important things. That degree of accuracy means that you can kind of custom design, sort of, or bespoke design the aligner trim height for that patient, for what that patient actually needs. And again, I don't think there's any other system that does that. From what I've seen and I've used, you either get a scallop or you get a very high finish line. So, and that may not always be right for every single patient, particularly at the beginning. So I think the scanning gives you that ability. And that was something a few years ago, I wasn't even thinking about that, if I'm honest truth. You just don't really think about these things. Don't really make sense. But the more you use them, the more logical it actually becomes, I think.
It's quite interesting that something that you think, oh, okay, the scanning is, it's great, the patient can see, it's more comfortable for the patients, it's quicker, etc. But actually, the way you've just explained it, it's actually got a kind of functional benefit as well. That's really interesting.
And the other thing, of course, is that if you are scanning and you are, submitting a case for a setup, the great thing about that is it's so simple and easy to do. If I've got a patient, and they're saying to me, yeah, I'm interested. And I said, let's scan and we can just see where it's going to go. And we don't have to, there's no commitment to it. You can just decide, we can just decide if you want to do something or not. And we can look at the digital setup. And because the scan's so simple to do, it's not a big hassle. And while I'm scanning that patient's teeth, what I always say to them is, and listen, if you decide not to do anything, it's no big deal. But the best thing is, I've got this scan. And what that means is in another, 1 year, 2 year, 3 years, we can look back at this scan, we can compare and see where you are, and I could potentially take another scan and we can see if things have moved. So actually what we've got right here is like basically a really important record of your teeth. Now, even if God forbid, you broke your tooth, at least we've got the color and we've got the actual shape and anatomy of your current tooth, so that we can actually then create another one based off this scan. So there's lots of benefits. And when you tell a patient something like that, they're like, wow, I didn't realize you can do that. So yeah. All these things are, as I say, even if you don't end up doing the aligners, you've still got something that's still really valuable for your kind of, the lifetime care of the patient, that lifetime approach, really.
What about the SureSmile technicians who create the proposals? Are the proposals that you get back, are they as expected on the whole? How much kind of refinement are you doing to those proposals before the elements are made?
I think that I've never had a big issue or problem or anything like that. I think they've always been very good. But what I always want people to remember is that you're the dentist. So I think it is very, very important that as long as you are prescribing clearly, and if I prescribe clearly, that they will carry out exactly what you want. And that always happens. I think if you leave it and just don't, put any information in and just say, straighten teeth or something, then don't expect them to then provide something which is clinically appropriate for that patient. They'll provide something which probably in the most efficiently and predictable way possible will get you from A to B. But the key thing is what is B and how does B relate to A? So I would say that I've had a very good experience. They're very responsive. When I've asked for something to be changed, it changes very quickly, literally on the day. And I have to say also, I think, comparative to a lot of the other systems out there that have used and still use, that actually the response time for setups is very good, and actually delivery times is way ahead of everyone else as well. So that's absolutely clear. But yeah, so I've found that the discussing with the technicians' cases and asking for things to be changed has been very straightforward, basically, and they've done what I've asked, which is sometimes there's little things that are very nuanced for the particular patient. So it's not been difficult at all. I mean, the most important thing is, I'm not you're not talking to a robot or an algorithm. You're talking to a real person, and that person will do as you ask and actually give you some feedback, etc., etc. If there's something that they feel we've asked for that's unrealistic as well. So overall, very good actually.
Do you have any tips for dentists when they're creating their setup in SureSmile to make sure that they do get the results that they're expecting?
One thing, the way that I teach people to look at cases is always use landmark points or reference points. What that means are that if you look at a patient at the beginning, there is usually a tooth or a point of a tooth which is actually in the correct plane, which might be anterior posterior, it might be vertical. And the point being is, if you know that that tooth is in the correct plane, say it's vertical, it's in the right sort of neutral muscular lip zone, etc., etc., it's got the right overjet compared to the lower teeth, then the idea being is you want to make sure that that point remains in the same position. So what I will commonly write on my SureSmile kind of prescription is distal of upper left 1 is in the right position currently. Please ensure that point ends up in exactly the same plane. And so obviously through the treatment, if it's appropriate, they may do a bit of round tripping. They might bring the teeth forward and bring the teeth back. But the nice thing is I can then actually check, particularly using the grid feature, when I go through my digital setup, and I'll see that tooth move, but then I'll see it end up in exactly the same point. And I have to say, the techs are particularly good at listening to that and doing that. It's very rare that I ask them to do it and then it ends up somewhere else. That really doesn't happen. So I think landmark points are super important because they actually help relate the patient's teeth to the lips and the face. I think another just a general tip that I would give is it's almost a standard line that I write on every single prescription is I always ask them to avoid IPR on overlap contacts at the start of treatment. So the point being is if you've got a lot of crowding in the upper or lower anterior zone, the last thing you want to do clinically is to carry out anything more than I would say 0.1 or 0.2 mil of IPR. 0.3, 0.4, 5, it's out the question over teeth that overlap like this. It's, in my opinion, clinically unnecessary and actually damaging to teeth. So what I say to them is avoid that and please defer that till later. So the idea being that either the IPR would be carried out a bit more distally, if it's appropriate, so we could pull the teeth around, or it might be that once the teeth, if round tripping was appropriate, if once the teeth are slightly forward, then they would carry the IPR to then bring them back and close down any triangles. So I would say those two things are two really, really important features to kind of A, control the tooth positioning, and B, just make sure that you're doing your IPR in the most ethical and also aesthetic way as well.
And how flexible is SureSmile if you want to make refinements during treatment?
Completely actually. And I think A, because you're this is where it really has been I say lifesaver type word, but it's been made a real difference, is the fact that because the work turnaround is so quick, you don't think about it. Now that there are other systems where it can take 3 or 4 weeks for stuff to come back. So therefore, you almost in your mind are put off from doing refinements. Does that make sense? But in reality, I have to say that's been pretty rare because I think that the fact of the matter is that the aligners just work basically. And as I say, definitely, if I think back to all my cases, I'm definitely having less cases with refiners. I think there are other things that are important. I think placing attachments correctly and also carrying out the IPR correctly, that makes a difference. There's no doubt there's some clinical things that if you do them correctly, you make a difference. But equally, knowing that, the aligners are sort of bespoke for the patient's tooth height, if you see what I mean. And also, so you've got that variable trim line, et cetera. And the fact that they are obviously all on scans means that you should really find that your refiner numbers are a lot less. This whole idea of having like another 30 aligners or whatever, it just doesn't. It's never happened in my short socket. You might have had a couple here and there, but that's basically it in reality. So plus the other thing is, the technicians do understand I think you do need to be a little bit knowledgeable, but asking for overcorrections on certain teeth, etc. They'll do that for you and correctly. So so that gives you that ability to sort of control a little bit more if you want to. So it's, as I said, particularly for people who, now I'm talking this as a kind of GDP, but the SureSmile Ortho platform, it would give orthodontists or extremely experienced GDPs even that level of control to even move individual bits themselves, which I think is like, if you have that ability, it's an amazing thing to be able to do. But that's definitely not something, if you're not doing, you haven't done aligners for many years or ortho for many years, you shouldn't be jumping straight into that. Definitely SureSmile aligners where you want to be, where you want to be at the moment.
And how does SureSmile fit in with the rest of your delivery of restorative dentistry? Do you use it a lot as part of bigger cases?
Yeah, the reality is that actually there are now very, very few cases that I take on without a bit of ortho. It's surprising, actually, and this kind of gets us back to this whole ortho restorative thing, that if teeth are crowded or at the moment, then there is actually an 80% chance they're going to keep crowding. Okay, that's irrefutable evidence. The evidence is out there that if mild, moderately crowded teeth, lower arch particularly, have an 80 to 85% chance of getting worse, and it's 60 to 70, I think, on the upper arch. So the point being here is that if I had a set of slightly crooked, very chipped upper teeth, if I just veneered and crowned those teeth and I didn't do any ortho, I haven't actually solved that continuum crowding problem. And so in 5, 10, 15 years' time, those teeth actually will keep moving. So actually, crowning and veneering teeth that are crooked is a silly thing to do without considering ortho, because actually the teeth are going to move anyway. So the reality is, I can't, pretty much every case that I approach nowadays, pretty much everyone, unless the teeth are dead straight, and there are some people that are, I will actually be talking about doing ortho and fundamentally most of those cases are going to be with aligners. And the simple reason being is that, of course, a lot more people are more accepting, aligners. Everyone seems to know about them nowadays. Okay, so everyone's talking about them, and somebody's had them. But the other thing about aligners that I really like, and I think this for me is an advantage, is that actually the control is extremely high in the sense of, because aligners and SureSmile aligners, they are actually a closed system. You've got that digital control to make sure that if the posterior teeth are well positioned, that there's absolutely no risk of moving them. And one of the biggest problems with fixed orthos, if you're not extremely skilled with fixed ortho, and of course there are people that are, that there is a danger that when a wire goes on, that the whole arch can actually move. But with aligners, the teeth are bound down, so they're only going to go where you are planning them to go. And that's why the planning part is really important, that you have planned them to go to the correct position. So they should really only go in theory where they're meant to go. So yeah, I would say that if I was to kind of summarize, 9 out of 10 of my kind of restorative cases involve ortho. And actually, if I didn't involve ortho, the case would be compromised. It would actually be hugely compromised. And what I would be telling that patient, if they wanted me to do a crown or a veneer on a crooked tooth, is I'd be telling them, I don't mind doing that for you, but you will need to wear a retainer after that treatment, because if I crown and veneer your crooked teeth, they're just going to keep moving anyway. And that's the interesting thing is, did you tell people that? It's actually surprising how many of those people say, really? Oh, I might as well just have ortho then. So it's ortho really is for every general dentist, and actually I get quite passionate about that, and I actually get quite irritated by people saying that general dentists shouldn't be doing ortho, because if you have that idea, you are really then not understanding the concept of constricting envelopes of function and what that can do to anterior occlusions. As soon as you've seen that, and the only way you're really going to see it is by being a practitioner that follows up in your own patients. As soon as you see that, you realize how much damage people not doing ortho has actually done to patients' teeth. So yeah, the answer to the question is, how involved, how much ortho is there in restorative? For me, there's no interface. People use this term ortho restorative interface. For me, ortho and restorative function occlusion, it's all the same thing. And I don't think of them any differently at all.
And you definitely think that orthodontics is something that every dentist should be?
I mean, they don't, I don't think, they should be forced to do it, but I think every dentist needs to understand that A, teeth keep moving, B, what the functional anterior occlusal effects of continued tooth movement actually are, and start monitoring their own patients and how their teeth start moving over the years. And so therefore, they should then have the ability to identify that and refer it. And the simple answer here is, if I was a patient as a dentist, and my dentist's treatment plan for my repeatedly chipping front tooth that was chipping because it was moving and it was in a constricting envelope of function, if his treatment plan was a veneer or a crown, I'm out the door. The treatment plan needs to be ortho. It's only ortho and restorative bonding, whatever that needs to be, and retention. It is not restorative dentistry. Restorative dentistry cannot fix problems where there are underlying tooth movement issues going on. So yeah, I would say absolutely yes. But of course, ortho needs to be approached sensibly, carefully, and in a controlled way, which is why I think, when dentists begin their ortho journey, it should be fundamentally anterior only. They need to understand how to assess and diagnose a patient so that they can tell the difference between what is gold standard treatment versus a compromised treatment, and the patient can choose the decision to decide between the two. Simple ortho should be something that every single GDP can do. So ortho is essential.
So if a dentist was interested in going down this pathway, what would the key tips be that you would advise somebody who's saying, okay, right, I need to understand a bit more about orthodontics?
I think the key thing is start with simple stuff, and don't assume you're going to be able to do full mouth ortho in a weekend course. That's just not going to happen, and it just shouldn't happen, quite frankly. I think there's lots of course programs out there, but the key thing is that they need to be delivered in a simple, clear, concise way. You do and should have mentoring. Obviously, this is stuff that we provide, and we're doing this obviously through the online SureSmile course as well. But I know there's lots of different options for people. But the key thing is that you take a program that's been well structured and that also has mentoring that will help you filter your cases. That's one of the most important things. We've been mentoring for many years, and we realized that dentists the most important thing is to tell them no, actually say, don't treat that case, do treat this case, and actually guide them through, check their assessments, correct their assessments, and help them to treatment plan. The idea is not to treatment plan for them, is to help them treatment plan so they see what they're doing. Just start with simple stuff. And it's a lot of the sort of stuff that these are patients that they're not screaming ortho patients. They've just got a little bit of mild misalignment, the kind of like aesthetic issues going on. And those are usually really easy aligner cases, actually. If you can get those going with a bit of bonding, et cetera, you can start to provide, nice results without having to pick up a drill. I said that's the sort of place to start. I've gone through the whole journey and have done a lot of different types of ortho, but in reality, I've now kind of ended up doing a lot of the simple stuff because I've realized there are literally hundreds of patients sat in your chair with aging, continually crowding, deepening bites, teeth becoming more crooked teeth, that actually we've spent so long ignoring in reality and not really telling them what's going on. So I'd say, always start simple, focus on, and we call it anterior alignment ortho, is really what general dentists should be doing. But it's important to be doing that on a patient that has understood the difference between the two.
On the back of that, then, what would be the piece of equipment that you would say, okay, you're starting out in ortho, buy one of these?
The first course to take is actually photography. Photography is the most important thing, but actually not just photography for cosmetic pictures. It's photography for monitoring and actually starting to learn how to talk to patients, etc. So I think photography and even an intraoral camera, I think they are absolutely vital. In fact, an intraoral camera for me was and is the reason why I actually did not leave the career. I nearly left dentistry about 25 years ago because I just didn't enjoy it, and I didn't enjoy the whole kind of situation you got when I was an NHS dentist at the time, and you tell a patient they needed something, and they would look up to you and say, "Oh, is that because you want to buy a Porsche or you go to Barbados or something?" And you know what, that feeling, it's a bit of a joke, but that feeling is, day on day, some form or some kind of attitude like that, it grinds you down. And I actually got to the point where I just thought, well, I'm trying to do the right thing for people, but you get this sort of attitude back from some patients, not everyone, and actually only left, believe it or not. And my boss bought me an intraoral camera. From that day on, and genuinely from that day on, I have never had a patient doubt anything I've ever said in my chair. And what I would say is, I meet dentists every day who are not happy because they're either working in a system, or they make the situation probably difficult for themselves because they're not using cameras, they're not using scanners, they're not using intraoral cameras, and they don't like dentistry. And you know what? Imagery is the solution to all the problems in dentistry. It really is. Now, every day I go into my practice and I never even have a doubt that someone's going to doubt me. And I love what I do and I really enjoy it. So, cameras, imagery. I say if you've got enough budget, get a camera and get a prime scan. That's probably all you need in reality, actually.
And just finally, a little bit about the patients. In theory, the digital workflow enhances the patient experience. Is that what you find in reality?
Yeah, definitely. I think when they, as I say, I think when they can even just see the scan being taken. So, I mean, I like to, once I've done a scan and I'm just checking over it, I always I've got the machine right in front of the patient, so they can see it. And actually, it's quite interesting. They've never had it done before. You just see their eyes literally go wide open, and they're like, "Wow, that's amazing!" I didn't realize you could do something like that. And of course, the prime scan is so super quick as well, that I think that's super important, because you grab their attention in the sense of they're seeing everything. Okay, now of course my patients are quite used, and my patients, bear in mind, are already quite used to seeing their images on screen with my intraoral camera. So actually, for them to look at the scan and say that's amazing, made it even more amazing for me, actually, for them to see it in 3D. So yeah, definitely. And what I'll always do is, as I'm actually just analysing the scan, I'll always analyse it again in front of them. So I pull into all the little fine details, just like, if there's a ditched amalgam or a bit of wear or something like that, you go in and just look and you just say, that bit's a bit of dentine, and that shouldn't really be exposed, and it's 8 times softer than the other stuff, which is enamel, blah 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 blah. And then the patients sort of become, as I say, as we talked about, they're already aware that things are changing. And as I say, I'm never pushy. I never sort of say, you need to do this and you need to do that. What I say is stuff is going to change over time, and you got 3 choices. You don't have to do anything. We can just monitor it. We can take another scan of it. When you get to a certain point, if it's worrying you, I can just give you a retainer. Actually, we could just hold things where they are, or give you a bite guard and just protect things. And if you want, at some point, you can do something about it. And really, when patients, say, what can you do? Then, I say to them, well, go through the simulation software. This is kind of where the setup would be. And obviously, the patient's got a lot of wear and stuff. It's quite hard to simulate that there and then. But obviously, lots of photographs of patients that we've treated, I just say, this is the sort of thing. This is edge bonding, and this is what your bite, it looks like when your bite's a bit more open and you'll show a bit more tooth, etc., etc. So that's why your camera is so important, because at an early stage, it's very, very important to track what you've done. So if you've done some nice cases, they may not even look that brilliant to you, but it's so important to photograph and document the cases that you've done, so that when you see someone later who's got something similar, you say, okay, here, this is somebody that I treated, and this is the outcome. And just as important as that, that's why it's important to take pictures of patients who don't have treatment. Okay, and this is the thing that a lot of people don't do, and this is also where scanning can help. If you take pictures of patients who don't have treatment, you will suddenly start to see those changes go on, and you'll suddenly be able to show a patient, who doesn't want treatment, and you can say, well, this is someone with teeth similar to yours 5 years ago, and here they were 5 years later, and you'll think, oh, wow, didn't really realize that might happen. So I think that camera is important, and just discussing with patients, and then that digital kind of journey with taking the scan, obviously also then looking at if you're going to do aligners, looking at the digital setup and then discussing that with patients. I always show the patients the digital setup, and I like them to see the kind of journey of the teeth, so that they also understand that aligners, it's not a binary on-off. Your teeth are going to suddenly look amazing, but actually, briefly, they might look slightly worse as the space opens up here or something happens. So I like them to understand that the teeth are going to move, and then at this point, by this certain time, we should get to some certain position that's going to look great for you. So I use the scanner, the simulation software, and then also the actual SureSmile, preview and staging a setup. And I discuss that with my patients as well to make sure that they are actually fully aware of what the plan actually is as well.
Many thanks to Tiff for his time, and what a great insight into how he uses imagery as such an important tool in his practice. If you'd like to know more about getting started with SureSmile, including information on courses and mentoring, please visit www.dentsupplyserona.com/SureSmile.